Okay, so this is the presentation I gave to the Worldwide Data Vault conference this year in 2023 last month, and it was entitled "What's the Story?" And let's just get into it. I'll start with a quick introduction of myself. Basically, I consider myself a data professional. I've been working in data since the beginning of my career back in the early 1980s, and ended up being a DB2, DBA for a while. I'm sort of a recovering DBA now. And as a data professional, I've sort of worked through working with the Data Vault for a number of years now, and giving several presentations at the conference regarding using the Data Vault and how to get the best answers from your data. And I'll start this presentation with another story that sort of illustrates some of the problems I think that we have currently in business intelligence. And it starts with a story. This story really, I developed the artwork for this using DALL-E, which sort of shows my prompting skills here. But this is a man in a balloon who is sort of struggling a little bit and a little bit lost. So this is a story about this man in the balloon. He lowers the balloon down and says, "Can you tell me," to a man sitting on the ground, saying, "Can you tell me where I am and which way I'm heading?" And the man on the ground looks at his cell phone basically and gets back to him and says, "Sure, you're at 45 degrees. 28 minutes and 28.9 seconds north, 72 degrees, 42 minutes and 39.5 seconds west, and you're about 252 meters above the sea level," which happens to be the coordinates of where the conference was located in Stowe, Vermont. Right now, you're hovering, but on the way here, you were moving at a speed of 1.83 meters per second at a 1.929 gradient. And the man in the balloon says, "Yeah, wow, that's amazing. By the way, are you a data professional?" And the man on the ground looks up and says, "Yes, I am, but how did you know?" And the man in the balloon says, "Well, everything you told me is completely accurate. You gave me more detail than I needed, and you told me in such a way that it was no use for me at all." The man on the ground said, "Dang, by the way, that's too bad. Are you a business executive by any chance?" And the man in the balloon, of course, says, "Yes. How did you know that? How did you know that?" "Well, you don't know where you are. You don't know where you're going. You got where you are by blowing hot air, and you started asking questions after you got into trouble, and you're in exactly the same spot you were a few minutes ago, but now somehow it's my fault." And this is really a encapsulation of the problem between data professionals and business professionals, and the lack of communication that we see going on between those. So one of the things that this presentation is going to try to do is outline and assist us in finding out what the business intention is of your business intelligence endeavors, because the man in the balloon was going somewhere and he was not getting to where he was going, and telling him a bunch of detail and giving him a bunch of data that doesn't help if you don't know where he's trying to get to is sort of what we're trying to avoid doing in business intelligence in general. So when we try to determine business intent, we want to understand what the purpose is. And we have to do that by asking the right questions. The technique that we do for that in agile principles in general and in Data Vault specifically is we use the agile methodology. The agile methodology helps us to capture the intention of the business in story format. So what the understanding is and what the business is trying to do with their data is what we're really focusing on. We're looking at future visioning to find out what success looks like for the business when they develop the information necessary and start to make the decisions they need to make using that. We can do that in several different ways. There's, techniques around for brainstorming or creating press releases, in advance of what's happening. So this is, this is an example that we'll show you here in a bit. It's really the realm of the business analyst role or persona in a business intelligence framework with all of the people that you've got involved with. And somebody needs to be able to understand the business and with enough analysis to understand what the intention of that business is and what they're trying to achieve by utilizing their data in such a fashion. So one of the things, a business analyst, if you haven't got a dedicated business analyst in your project, you can benefit from some AI large language modules like ChatGPT. And I've got a link here in the bottom of this presentation to give you some ideas on how you can use ChatGPT to maybe generate some questions, some good questions that you want to ask your business. So that's exactly what I did here, is what are the questions we should be asking the business leaders to uncover the value of business intelligence. And you can go through any of these questions and they should be answerable. And if you start asking these questions and you don't get answers, you might try and find some other individuals in your enterprise that can help you understand what are the gaps that you have and what are the types of things you're trying to do with that data so that you can prepare a story at a high level within your business intelligence program to really articulate what it is you're trying to accomplish with this, because we'll go through some different approaches and different ways in which you can accomplish that here through this presentation. So another technique I was mentioning earlier is you might fill in the blanks for a press release. There's an example of a press release that I asked ChatGPT to create for a balloon business that's trying to get somewhere. And you can see in here that there's certain things that the business is trying to get, and understanding that we're getting a reduction, reductions in some key process indicators or KPIs within the business that'll help us report upon the success of our business intelligence initiative. So that's what we're really trying to do that with that. And in order to do that, what we're going to try and do is really take advantage of these types of things. Here's one with the ballooning example where, here's this is again from ChatGPT, but it's trying to differentiate how we are using our data to ensure, our enhanced delivery of what we're doing, and making integrating weather information into our ballooning exercises and those types of things. So the elements of a good agile development data story are really answering a bunch of questions, right? Yeah, and you fill in these, and the beauty, I think, of agile approaches and the Data Vault 2.0 system of business intelligence sort of recommends, if you haven't got an agile use case, use disciplined agile delivery, which sets up a bunch of things that you can do and maybe want to do. And these are elements of a good agile development data story. Is who is it? What are they trying to do? What's the acceptance criteria? How do we know that we've got this satisfied? What's the priority, the estimation, dependencies? Simplicity and clarity is really important in this, so that we can be flexible in how we develop our story around this, answering all of these different questions. So depending on your organization, you have a number of different orientations that might, lead you to different approaches to this. So let's go take a look at some of those. Your organization really is on a continuum of data literacy, really, and it depends where you are in that continuum as to what types of things you're trying to get, what type of information you're going to get out of that. So I'm going to look at three different continuums now. One is the data-centric versus decision-centric maturity model, the analytics use case that you have for a maturity model, and then just a bit of a discussion about what are we going to do with this? Are we going to operationalize it? Are we going to use it for ad hoc sort of data science-y type things? We don't know what we're trying to do yet, that type of approach. The first thing to look at, I think, is in the data maturity model. You can look at the CMMI processing, which is the capability model, maturity model integration approach to things, which gives you a set of levels, usually 5, starting at level 1. And there's a continuum of these things that you graduate through. You can't jump right to optimization without having all of the previous levels understood and mechanized, essentially. And most of the organizations that we're dealing with are really in the lower side of the maturity model in terms of emerging and intermediate levels, where you're starting to understand what your data is and what you'd like to do with that. So helping understand where you are in this. If you're at level 1, it's really not realistic for you to have data fully embedded into your decision-making processes at this point in time, which is maybe what the goal that you're trying to get to, or maybe not. It depends on your organization. Maybe you don't need to go that far. You're just trying to get a little better support for the decisions that you're trying to make. So this maturity model can help you understand in your organization where you are in this process, and that will give a better idea as to what type of informational delivery that you're going to have. Is it going to be more question and answer, like a star schema, which is really quite good at slicing and dicing information, but it doesn't give you a whole lot of predictive capabilities and modeling and that type of thing. So the next maturity model that may want to look at in terms of internally is your analytics maturity model. And basically there's a, pretty standard 4-stage model that people are looking at. And it starts off with a descriptive model, which is where most of the organizations at level 1 and 2 of the data maturity are just trying to figure out what happened, really trying to consolidate this information so that we can get some reports to be able to explain what's happening in our business. And large enterprises, this can be a challenging thing just on its own. Once you've sort of mastered that, you move on to the next level, which is a little bit more diagnostic. Why is it happening? You're starting to look into maybe designing some key process indicators. There's a wonderful resource for doing that. The KPI Institute has some pre-built almost or pre-suggested key process indicators for different segments of industry and different use cases that you have to try and visualize and understand a measure that you can begin to start trying to move one direction or another as a key process area. So diagnostic analytics is really trying to figure out, what's the cause maybe of this change? Why did it happen? Beyond that, and these are the two areas that, classic, I guess, BI has been focused on. What's being focused on a little bit more recently, I think, more with the advance of AI and some of the new predictive models that we have out there, is trying to figure out what's going to happen, forecasting the future of the market size, the future of this. If I do this, what will happen in the future for that? And there's all kinds of excellent models now that can take your data. The good news is the models exist there, that you have to give it good data in order to get good predictions. And once you've started to accomplish that, I guess the panacea or the brass ring is, can you start beginning to get prescriptive analytics, which will help you understand, what should I do if I would do this versus that? Which one of these will have a better outcome related to what my business intention is? And it all comes back to what the story is. What am I trying to do? Right. And then you can use some predictive and prescriptive analytics to help you understand what you should do next in order to achieve whatever, the outcome is. And oftentimes those outcomes are tied to money. Certainly profit and reducing cost and increasing profit are very important, but there's other factors that are also included in some of the desired outcomes that you have regarding some new design thinking about how that was going to affect the planet and the people on the planet and those types of things. So the third aspect that I think we want to look at is, how do you intend to operationalize this? What are you going to do with your business intelligence, information that you're creating? Are you going to be embedding decisions into your business operations, right? That near real time, that's the cool stuff. Can you get, fraud detection and near real-time analysis of what's going on right now inside your business? Or are you really looking for a more contemplative idea where you just want to get the reports out and I want to analyze the reports? That's the number one thing when I talk to business analysts, is they just want to analyze it and look at it. And when I try and probe further, they don't really know exactly what they're trying to do. They just want to get that and ask a bunch of questions. So that's really the descriptive and perhaps a little bit of the diagnostic level of intelligence in your business intelligence program, but very important. You want to be able to have an understanding of what's going on that's accurate and high quality. So while you're doing this, it's important to make sure that, as the business intention is to look at the data and contemplate it, you want to make sure that you have the highest quality data available and that you've taken care of mastering that data so that you don't have ambiguity about what the business, which business keys are involved in which parts of the data. There's the unhappy face in this whole environment is really around build it and they will come. And that's sort of ignoring the fact that you want to have a predefined story of what you're trying to accomplish. And that can come from both sides, both in the business folks who want to build their own things. They do their own models. I'm just going to get in the balloon and go, and we'll see where we get to. Or it can also be IT driven, where we're just trying to do, some form of IT infrastructure upgrade, and we're going to disguise it as a data project, right? We're going to move all of our stuff to the cloud and have it all in a new platform because this makes it cheaper for us to run and operate these things. But if you don't do that with understanding of business intention, you're probably going to end up with unhappy business users in doing that. So really one of the things that we want to try to do is get the man in the balloon and the man on the ground sort of in the same, you know, the same approach to things and understanding what they're trying to do. Maybe go ahead and articulate this in a story, what you're trying to do, and then socialize and plan it a little bit first before you start building it, and they will come approaches to your business intelligence. And the last part I wanted to just also ensure that you're also making sure that you're not using data to create disinformation. And disinformation is a wide topic, certainly. But what I mean by that really is understanding the cognitive bias that we have in information, that we're not just trying to, prove something we've already decided, and all kinds of biases are here. This is a really wonderful resource. The website here, I think I've included in the bottom of this, but it's a taxonomy and an ontology around all the different ways that humans are, think that they're being rational, but they're not. There really has a lot of biases and things into that you need to be aware of, that you're trying to understand the data, and what the data shows you is not something that you've already decided to be true. That's one of the things that one of the late night comics kind of coined a term called truthiness. It feels right, but it's not really the data. It can be oriented in such a way as you've got this thing called confirmation bias. And confirmation bias is really trying to, prove your point with data, or finding the data that actually does prove your point. And then, as this cartoon, says, it jackpot, I've got the right answer. And of course, there's all kinds of statistical ways in which you can get noise into your decision making through data if you're not careful, right? There's spurious correlations is a great website. He's got lots of examples of things that are not really cause and effect, but they happen to be correlated. So causation is not the same as correlation. And Daniel Kahneman's latest book called Noise is really wonderful, giving us some real practical ways in which we can try to get that type of decision making out of our decision making, and try to get the signal instead of just the noise that are coming in it. The last thing I'll say about this is understanding what dark data is and how it applies to this. And David Hand has a really good book that creates, again, a taxonomy of what types of dark data we have. But dark data is really data that we're not using. So we're missing data. It's not calculated correctly. We're self-selecting. We're not taking the right data sets. And in many cases, if you look at some of the decision intelligence things, sometimes you just don't have the right data, and you might have to go out and get that data through, you can do A/B testing or some sort of control test to find out if the data isn't there. You're making a bunch of assumptions. So just be careful about the information you're pulling from this, and that you're not just selecting some of the data that just tells the story that you want it to tell. So let's talk about the data vault now for a second. The data vault architecture, we kind of break it into left and right hand sides. The left hand side is really the physics going on of data, capturing your data and organizing it by business key and business key relationship in a data warehouse. We're capturing the facts as they were at the time. And I'll assume that, you've got that covered. And we'll talk about how you can make sure that you've got the right data vault there, but you've got all of the data in such a way that you can reproduce your source systems at the grain that it was provided. And if you can do that correctly, then you can begin to start deriving the information that you need, the story that you require. And there's various techniques that we have available to do that with, and that's what I'm going to go through now. The first one to look at, obviously, in this picture is the Business Data Vault. And the Business Data Vault is something that is optional. It's optional in the sense that you don't have to do it, but sometimes there's optional in the sense that I'm glad I don't have to do this. You're going to want to do this. The Business Data Vault is very, very useful for speeding and automating the delivery of information because it's tightly coupled to the raw data vault. By tightly coupled, what I mean is it's a sharing of the internal surrogate keys of the raw data vault. In fact, it's just basically restating those keys in a more informational aware way of accessing the data. So it's derived through data and metadata in the information delivery area. So the Business Data Vault is technically information. It's derived. There's a process that is being applied to the raw data to come up with these business rules associated with them called soft business rules. And using the Business Data Vault, we can begin to take the principles of Data Vault delivery of automation and metadata execution, pattern-based execution, and automate some of the creation of some of the objects in the Business Vault, which again helps us get to the value in much less time. So really one of the main benefits of the Business Data Vault is it's an extension of metadata-driven patterns that you can reuse. And generally what you're trying to do is align grain of time or grain of data of your raw data, and understanding how the timeline of those things are affected, and organizing the data at the same grain. And the Business Data Vault contains one or more of these specialized objects that are either tables or views. Views can be used to virtualize these things, and views from the sense of just basically a stored SQL statement, essentially. And the Business Data Vault can include hubs and links in it as well. The most popular type of table in the Business Vault, I think, is the point-in-time table. It aligns multiple timelines of context for a key set. Very similar to a type 2 slowly changing dimension, if you're familiar with that concept and how things changed over time. A point-in-time table can give us the situation at any point in time that we want. The simplest point in time is now, but oftentimes we're trying to do a history or do a trend analysis of what it was over time. And this hit table can be very useful to doing that. Combining that with the bridge table, which is business key focused alignment of grain, is more like a fact. The transactions, the associations, it combines things that you see in your data sets that are describing relationships, transactions, associations, more like a fact associated with that. So pits and bridges together can be used to virtualize star schemas that I'll talk about here in a minute. Another common use case for the Business Data Vault, though, is the computed or calculated satellite. And, that's sort of kind of what a pit table is, if you think about it. But it's basically, you can create calculated information and insert that, or, create augmented data that is derived based on soft business rules. For instance, KPIs or mastered context, qualities, feature store, reference data, all kinds of different things can be brought in to enrich that raw data that you've got. And the calculated satellite is a great way to do that. It just describes more data about your business keys or business key relationships. Another object you'll see in the Business Vault oftentimes are same as links, where you have to manage the mastering of data. You haven't got data governance, so not all the entire enterprise is not calling the same business entity by the same key. The same as link allows us to do that, so that if you've got data that you acquired a company from that the customer IDs are not going to align, you can use the same as link in the Business Vault to do that kind of alignment to that. And again, the whole point being here is that we can start to use these pattern-based, maybe using views, even generated views, to simplify the development of some of the things that you're trying to do in your information mart, whether it's a star scheme or simply as Dan calls it, a report collection, the big wide table, which is another technique that people use to get the information available in their BI tools. So the Business Data Vault is part of the information delivery area. The information delivery area is sort of a generic part of the architecture that we have, and it's where the business comes for answers. And by far the number one, I'm going to go through 3 different approaches to this. There's no limit to how many different approaches you can have, but I think the number one approach that people are still using is the dimensional model. The dimensional model for presenting a set of data that can be asked questions of, right? You can do ad hoc queries, slicing and dicing of the data in a dimensional model very easily. Another type of thing that you can ask questions of is a link data or a semantic web. So what are the relationships between these different things? And then the third type is just flatten this data out into what a report collection or an integration or feature store of all the different types of data that we've got in our data warehouse that have been curated through a set of soft business rules. Anything derived from raw data using soft business rules goes into what we call the information area, which means we have our left-hand side of the architecture and the data warehouse can become the source for this. And that means we don't have to worry about conforming all of our information marks because we can reproduce them. We don't need to do that. So we can avoid dependencies between star schemas, even in our information delivery area. So one of the things, the best practices I think that are out there is, you're trying to avoid dependency. You can leverage versioning of your information mark using this, and some very, very complex problems go away when you take this approach of data operations and continuous integration and continuous delivery of information. So let's look at the first one, which is the dimensional model, which is by far the number one approach. Just about everybody that we see going through the Data Vault training is really working on, initially at least, getting this approach involved. And it's really, it's kind of a low maturity in terms of its descriptive in nature, kind of, a schema that you're going to be populating, but it's easy to get the data out. Easy egress. The egress means getting out. But how do you accomplish it? There's a couple of different ways you can do it. There's the one way is to just do a legacy refactor of new technology and approach, right? Basically, we've got an existing set of star schemas that kind of business likes. This is one of those IT driven things, what might be, the right decision. I'm not judging any of that. It's just, it becomes an ETL reverse engineering project. It's more or less tedious, but it also, is an indicator that you perhaps haven't got an understanding of what the business is trying to do and what kind of things that their current star schemas are not answering, the questions that they're not answering if we just reproduce them. The good part about this is, though, that you can test this, right? Because you can compare. If you're just producing the same star schema with different plumbing underneath, maybe reducing the latency or increasing some of the quality, you can test and report upon that. So, this might be the right approach. Another approach is you've got a greenfield, you've got a net new design, you don't have an existing thing, and you're going to try and build a star schema from the data vault that you've created. So one of the techniques that Dan and I've worked with for years is something called a raw data mart. This is a very useful technique when you don't have a real good understanding of what the business wants to do with this data, because it's basically, there's no soft rules, but it's an automation. There's an algorithm in place that you can take and sort of develop a way in which you can read through parts of your raw data vault and produce raw data mart star schemas that map hubs to satellites and pits and dimensions and create type 2 slowly changing dimensions through that and mapping link satellite measures, numeric values in a link satellite that become your facts. And it's pretty easy to do this. And again, the nice part about this is it can be automated. You can extend your automation framework to start building these things to give users access to the data. Oftentimes that's just what they want. They don't know what they want, but then once they see the data, they begin to understand what they can do with that, and they can easily tell you what they don't like. So you can take this approach to doing two different ways. You can take a gap analysis approach. Here's the beginning, and sort of say, this is what your star scheme is going to look like unless you tell me something. Right. And oftentimes the business will look at it and go, oh yeah, but I didn't want that data, and I don't want this, and I want to move this over to there. That's all good. You can start to use this to iterate from, or if you want to, you can just give it to the business user and give them a good BI tool and let them go off on their own and do their own modeling, their own business rules around those types of things. Can also be a very satisfactory way to increase the time to value. If I've got a motivated end user who understands how to use the Power BI or whatever BI tool that you're using, let them go for it and let's see where they get. So that's something else you can look at. There's also a technique out there called the unified star. This is something I haven't actually done. I've got the book, I've looked through it, it looks interesting, but I'm not sure whether this is really going to work. But it's similar to that. Just give it's one big table, essentially the mother of all bridge tables. It's a variation of, we can produce this using the raw data mart approach. We've, at PG2, we've created some Warescape mappings, for instance, that will do this, and just you pick which ones you want, and if you pick them all, you'll get a unified star schema essentially from that. If you want to go out and design it, you can take a look at the Kimball's Data Warehouse Toolkit. There's lots of great information in there. It seems a little bit tired. What most of the issue there is, the Kimball approach is trying to use the star schema as the data warehouse. And the Data Vault approach, that's not what we do. We have the data warehouse and it's modeled as a raw data vault. And then the Kimball approach to the modeling of the star schema becomes all we have to do. We don't have to worry about durable keys and understanding all of the data that we have. We can be more selective in how we build that. And I think one of the things that I would recommend, something that we took the training at PG2, is a technique called Beam from Lawrence Carr. And he's also got an accompanying book. It's really well written. It's pure star schema development, but in an agile fashion, well explained, and really a good approach to that. And in many, consulting engagements, what we're doing is adapting that. I think Isaiah calls this a mini beam. We take parts of the beam approach to things and apply them so that we can understand and document what the intention of the business is. So the star schema, definitely number one with a bullet still. Another approach that we're seeing more and more now is linked data. It's really a type of property or knowledge graph. Right? How do you do that? Well, a property graph is simply also known as a labeled property graph, and it's pretty flexible. It has nodes, edges, and properties that are generally stored as key value pairs. And it's really good for specific use cases, easier egress than a knowledge graph. A knowledge graph is more of a formalized relationship ontology associated with this. But the property graph was used, there's a really good documentary on Netflix about the Panama Papers and how they used, I think Neo4j was the property graph to just link together all the different documents and entities that produce those documents and people that were associated with the entities. And you can get some very good analysis from property graphs. The next level of things to doing that, this is an example of a property graph, there would be the knowledge graph, which is a little bit formalized for it. It's an RDF, resource data framework. There's some rules around capturing this with the semantic web that lets you integrate your data with other graphs associated with it. You've got nodes and edges, and then triples that are formulated using subject, object, and predicate styled assertions or axioms associated with that. The nice part about this is that it has this inherent composability of these graphs. And when two nodes have the same URI, which is the identifier, or the same business key, for instance, they are automatically mergeable with this technology. So you can bring in and start to build a larger picture of what your data is telling you. And you can see my presentation from last year at the conference about this, because I talked about knowledge graphs and how those can be used to help get your information in a format that you can use. So now the last thing I want to talk about is maybe developing an enterprise ontology. And, it's really developing a semantic or concept model. How do you go about doing this? Because a concept model, really from the day one, as Dan has always said, it's about the business and the business concepts that we're trying to reflect in there. So how do we go about doing that? Well, you've got a couple of different options there. One is you can develop a formal ontology. And like I said, last year's talk, I talked about OWL and some different techniques and ways in which you can do that in a relatively formal way. But you don't have to do that. I think you can also do, a concept model or an informal ontology, which is really more just more of a communication vehicle. A concept model plus plus that I believe is really table stakes for Data Vault. So Data Vault needs to have a concept model available to it so that you can understand what when you're not building source system data vaults. So source system data vault is something where you're not paying attention to the concepts of the business and integrating shared business keys across different lines of business in that. So if you have a concept model that you develop about your business, that really can be used to inform and almost derive what your raw data vault model should look like. And if you don't have a concept model, you're going to have a higher tendency to develop a source system data vault. So one of the things you can do with a concept model is sort of assess how well your concept model and your data vault model are aligned around the business concepts. And that's something that you can numerically assess between those two different graphs, because there is a path from the concept model to the data vault, raw data vault model, and there's also a path from the raw data vault model back to the concept model. And they should have a high degree of alignment associated with that. You can read, there's some excellent presentations out there. Alex Sharp, Ronald Ross, John Giles has a wonderful set of books out there. And there's Ronald Ross's, John's book on elephant, the nimble elephant. It really talks about how to develop that ontology, that top-down ontology. In fact, he gives us in the elephant in the fridge an example of a high-level ontology that we can begin to work things from and attach things to. There's others out there, but that's a great start. And that it's really important to understand this is high value stuff, and that the business, when you start having them jointly develop this model of the business concepts, that they begin to take ownership of that, and it gets a lot of momentum in your business intelligence programs in terms of getting business buy-in, as well as getting rid of ambiguity. And ambiguity is a big problem in the world in general. When you've got large organizations that have slightly different viewpoints on things, having terms and rules that are clearly defined in a concept model goes a long way from preventing you from having to rework things. And really, what did you mean by customer? What did you mean by product or items, or any of the things that you are interested in getting data of? It's really good for communication artifacts and perspectives. When done properly, I've seen this posted up in the bulletin boards in the coffee rooms, as people really start to use this as an explanation vehicle for new people coming into your business, because it really integrates your business vocabulary and starts collecting some of that metadata. And if you've got that metadata available, you can begin to use that to generate some of the data vault things. So Warescape has a conceptual modeling component that you can take that conceptual model and through a conversion process, then begin to build your raw data vault model. So there's been lots of presentations recently at the Data Vault UK users group and North American user group around Ellie as another way to capture those business things and then feed that metadata into whatever automation framework, whether it's Warescape, VaultSpeed, or Irwin, doesn't really matter. You can take that data and begin to align that metadata with what you're trying to do in your conceptual model. So let's talk about how you get that conceptual model from build, and what the definition of it is. It's really a description of the business. It's a business model in terms of what the business is doing, not so much who, how, when, and where. It's not a Beam. If you look at what star schemas are and what Beam is trying to do is business event modeling. They focus on the events of your business. Concept models really focuses on the concepts in your business, the what's in your business, the things in your business that it needs to maintain records of, right? The business elements or entities associated with these things that become hubs in your raw data vault model. You also want to include some interesting facts about those things. Relationships and attributes can be included in a conceptual model if they're essential. Oftentimes it's about the state of something, and how the state can be impacted. Some of the rules associated with the state of a customer becomes a lead, becomes a prospect, becomes a qualified lead. That kind of stuff can be all documented very well in a conceptual model. You can also include some key essential things of processes and rules that govern things about those things that you're dealing with. And again, we're talking about the essentials of the business, not the details, not the how it was implemented in this system versus that system, but how the business thinks of and really works with it. And from that, you get some metadata. And you start with those terms and you end up with what is often called a controlled vocabulary, where your business folks are all talking about things in the same way and the same things about the same way about what they're talking about. It's a very, very useful thing to get to that point if you can do that. So how do you get there? How do you get those? How do you find out what these things are? Well, you want to try and understand and use this as a communication tools by disambiguating this business that you've got, right? That's, as Ronald Ross says, it's one of the biggest problems we have out there. So, what you can do is create a workshop, perhaps, that you can get together with your business folks and ask them what the top 10 things in the business, and there aren't that many of them. Usually the top 10 is more like top 5 are really where you start, but you can do those things and ask them, to, come back with a bit of do a little homework, come in and talk about things in the business that are essential, things that we can discuss one of them as a singular noun. Typically in language, they're going to be nouns. We can discuss one of them, but we have multiple occurrences or instances of them, and we need to keep track of them individual. We have a countable business key associated with them. We need to be able to differentiate our customers or our accounts or whatever it is that we're keeping track of. And we have facts recorded and maintained about those, by the way. So that's something we also have to coordinate and understand what those facts or records that we have are associated with them. The things in your business are the things that are acted on by processes. We do stuff to them. They make sense in a verb noun pair. And typically what you're going to see is those associations will become links. So the things become hubs and the things we do to those things become links. But what we want to focus on in a conceptual model is the essence and be unambiguous. What is one of those things? Not how is it implemented in system A versus system B versus system C. Those details are important, but not at a conceptual level. At the same time, one of the things that you might want to also do is search for counterfactuals, things that are, need to be true. And if it's not true, then this isn't true. Are there exceptions? Are there some surprises when you start talking about, from a business perspective, the things in your business? Once you've got all of the things at the high level, understand at the conceptual level, which is, generally not that many, you can start to delve into a little bit about the relationships that you have associated with these things. So those associations and relationships are often termed units of work that you have at a conceptual level. These are the main events that happen in the business. What happens to those things? You can look for taxonomies associated with those things, hierarchies of your terms, so that you can, as John Giles in his book very beautifully describes, you pick the level of the taxonomy or the grain that is the most appropriate for your use cases. And then you can develop sets of, business rules or triples or axioms that are basically facts about the things in your business and how that works. You can use John's, high level map and reuse that framework very easily. Done that. There's schema.org if you're going to be using linked data or trying to understand how that works. There's wonderful resources there. KBpedia, I talked about this again last year. And if you want to get more information, I've got a link here to a 3.5-hour sort of YouTube mix on conceptual models from the U of A. And the U of A is not University of Alberta or Alabama. It's actually Amsterdam, which is, I think, where Alex Sharp is nowadays. So let me just wrap up here with this. A summary of this presentation is the conceptual model, I think, really is a must and a prerequisite for the controlled vocabulary that gets us talking about the same things in the same way. So we want to have a conceptual model. If we don't have a conceptual model and we built a raw data vault, we can, assess by building a conceptual model, you can assess the appropriateness of your raw data vault as it's aligned with a conceptual model. But the conceptual model should not take, a lot of time to do. That's the other thing about this. It's agile. You want to be able to do it as quickly as possible by getting the right people in the right room at the right time. Data Vault 2 is a system of business intelligence, and there's all kinds of choices for informating your data. Data Vault 2 is a data warehousing approach where we create a pure data warehouse, all of the facts that you have about your business that you've recorded, so that you can begin to understand what kind of soft business rules you want to use in order to get information from that, to informate, to answer and ask questions of your data. But it really all begins with the story. Where is that balloon rider headed and why? What's he trying to do? Maybe he could take a train and get there sooner, or maybe the balloon is the right way to go and we just need to get some more navigational data associated with that so that he can recreate, we can do a Google Apps, a Google Maps kind of approach to, the route that he's taking with the balloon to getting to where he's trying to get to. And that's what data can be useful for this, if we understand the story that the business is trying to, tell, I guess. And information delivery can also deliver more than just answers to questions. You can deliver knowledge and wisdom through, enhancing and enriching the questions and answers that you have. Once you've stopped asking a question, it becomes knowledge, right? And putting it into words requires language. And putting it into words, and with auto-generative AI, we now have a tremendous amount of opportunity to take the language of the business and turn that into concepts, and turn that into a raw data vault, and then turn that into a business vault, and turn that into useful information in a much more automated fashion. The way to do this is using an incremental approach, minimum value increments. That is the iterative path towards BI success using Data Vault 2, right? Satisfy the stories. The business lived happily ever after once that was done, right? The balloon rider got to where he was trying to get to. So that's the end of the presentation. Here's how you can contact me if you want to. Hopefully this made some sense to you, and remain curious and continue on with your data vault journey. Good luck to you.